We're continuing the series on the 12 tribes of Israel. We mentioned how Rachel's children went into the area of Scandinavia, and that some of the other tribes would be with Rachel's children because they were among her concubines. So we're going to pick up there tonight, and we're going to talk about the three tribes that are listed on the north side of the camp, which are Dan, Asher, and Naphtali, and some people call it Naphtali. They camped on the north side. Each one of them had their own camping area. So Asher, Naphtali, and Dan camped together. And Dan was the lead tribe, and their symbol was the eagle. He would also have the symbol of the white horse, which we're going to talk about next. The mother of Dan was Bilhah, and she also was the mother of Naphtali. And Dan and Naphtali are often linked with each other. We can identify normally Naphtali as Norway and Dan as Denmark. So let's just talk about the characteristics of Dan first. Josh, would you read Genesis 49, 16, 17, and 18 for us?
Verse 16, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider shall fall backward. In verse 18, I have waited for your salvation, O Lord.
Okay, very good. Now, to just explain those three verses, Dan's name meant God is judged, or God is judge. And sometimes they are associated with the white horse. And when you see a symbol of a white horse, they usually associate that with the tribe of Dan, mainly because it talks about here that the horse's heels are bit by the snake. So you see a horse that's rearing, a white horse that's rearing up. That's usually the symbol of Dan. And that is found on their coat of arms in the country of Denmark. Denmark has the coat of arms that has the white horse on its hind feet. And I think that's really interesting because that was the area that Dan was in. Now, it says that they would be a serpent and an adder, and we're going to explain some of these things, and it says they would wait for their deliverance or their salvation. Some other characteristics of the tribe of Dan, it says in Judges 5, verse 17, why did Dan remain in ships? There is an inscription that links Dan with both of the tribes that were the sea people. Now, the sea people lived around 1200 BC, and Dan is linked with those two tribes. And those tribes those two tribes were the ones that helped bring down the city of Troy. If you remember, the city of Troy fell, and Dan was involved in the war that brought down the city of Troy. Now, Dan has some unbelievable history. And Herodias, he said some very interesting things about the tribe of Dan. He said that the area of Greece was founded by the son of Hercules, which was Samson. It says that Hercules' son was called Heclipidid, and Heclipidid claimed that he had descended from Hercules, which was Samson, through a slave girl named Jordanus. And Herodias wrote that in his book in section 7, where he records that the son of Hercules, which was the son of Samson, apparently Samson had a child by a slave girl, and that son went in and conquered the area of Greece, according to Herodias. Now, I think that's really interesting. Now, there's another connection in Greek mythology. Of course, we can't prove Greek mythology. The god Apollo had a son named Moppus, whose mother in mythology was Danaan. Now, Danaan was, according to Josephus says Danaan was mother of Hercules, and it says that there's a town at the very top of the Jordan River with the same name as Danaan. Now, there's another quote from the Greeks. Now, Diodorus, who was a historian, And Strabo and Euripides wrote the following. It says, Danaus, the father of 50 daughters, on coming to Argos, took up his abode in the cities around Hellas, which Hellas would be Greece, and laid down the law that all the people hereafter named the Pelesians were to be named Danaans. The tribe of Dan was never able to push out the Philistines, who were the people that were in their assigned land. And so that's one of the reasons they began migrating early into the area of Greece and later into the area of Ireland. Dan would eventually get pushed out of Greece and they would go into the land of Ireland. Now, actually, before the Milesians landed in the area of Ireland, the tribe of Dan had already been there, the Irish people.
They would be called the Tetuta Danaans.
Dan named many things in Europe after himself. Now, we have the Don River, which is named after Dan. We had the Blue Danube. We have the Neptune River that's named after Dan. And of course, we know that Denmark is the mark of Dan. They named rivers after themselves. They named land masses after themselves. And every time they conquered a land in the land of Israel, they named it after the tribe of Dan also. They had two cities that they conquered. One was called Lashem and Laish, and both were renamed. Now notice the coat of arms for Lower Saxony, Northern Rhine, and Lithuania all have a reared up horse on them. And the coat of arms for Ireland has an eagle on it. Now Ireland and Denmark would be the areas where Dan would basically reside. Now the word Denmark comes from the word mark of Dan. And this would be the area that the people of Dan would settle, as well as Ireland. And you will notice here that it has a horse reared up on their symbol and a regular horse head on it, which would represent the tribe again of Dan. We do know that Dan is not mentioned in the 144,000 of the tribes of Israel listed in Revelation 7. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to be saved, because if you go back and we reread that scripture we just read, which was Genesis 49:18, it says, I wait for your deliverance, O Lord. I think you said that word is salvation there. It's saying here is that they will wait for their salvation, or they will wait for their calling. And that's basically what that's implying. And the fact that they are not part of the 144,000 proves that they're not in that first fruits group. Now, why? Why are they left out? And why do they have to wait for salvation? Can we read Judges 18?
And in verse 15, so they turned aside there and came to the house of the young Levite man, to the house of Micah, and greeted him. The 600 men armed with their weapons of war, who were of the children of Dan, stood by the entrance of the gate. Then the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land went up. Entering there, they took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molded image. The priest stood at the entrance of the gate with the 600 men who were armed with weapons of war. When these went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molded image, the priest said to them, What are you doing? And they said to him, Be quiet, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us. Be a father and a priest to us.
Now, this is an important story because Dan was the tribe that introduced idolatry to the rest of the tribes. And God is holding him responsible for introducing idols to the other tribes. Now, we want to move on and talk about Asher. And Asher was the tribe of the Vandals. Now, Asher was second born of Zilpah. And let's go ahead and read about Asher. I think that's Genesis 49, verse 20.
Bread from Asher shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties.
Right. Now, that Moses said that he would dip his foot in oil. And it's interesting because the tribe of Asher basically left out of the land of Israel early, and they went into the area, the very bottom of Britain, and that area was called Cornwall, and they were highly involved in manufacturing. There's a lot of history about Cornwall and how the tribe of Asher was there. And they would also have as their inheritance in the land of Israel right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, because they basically, as we mentioned earlier, were the Vandals. And they would push their way up the Vistula River, and they moved themselves out of Scythia, and they pushed themselves into Spain, and eventually they got pushed out of Spain into the area of North Africa, and they began to be called the Africans. And it's interesting because Gibbon, who wrote The Fall of the Roman Empire, mentioned how they went in and just cleaned up Africa. They shut down the houses of prostitution. They stopped all the crime in the region. They just cleaned the area up. And he mentioned how these people were a Christian people. How in the world did these people get branded pagans and barbarians? And now today it says they would dip their foot in oil. Now they have found a oil finding in the land of Israel. It's off the coast of Israel. I think it's 1.5 billion estimated tons of oil and gas. And it's right off that coast area, right there where Asher would have been. He was assigned to the coast area on the Mediterranean Sea. So when you read that he dipped his foot in oil, that's exactly what he did. Now, the other interesting piece of that is that in the land of Asher, his territory extended down into Sidon and Tyre. That's where the largest olive production is. There's a huge olive production in that area where the tribe of Asher was. Godfrey of Mammoth recorded that after the Vandals were pushed out of Africa, they were pushed out of Africa around the 5th century. Actually, it was 533 A.D. they were pushed out of Africa. Apophicus, who is the historian who wrote The Fall of the Roman Empire, recorded that they got on ships and sailed away. And Godfrey of Mammoth recorded that 160,000 Africans, which were the tribe of the Vandals, they were the ones that actually helped the Saxons invade Britain. So they went into Britain with Saxons. Now we also know that they would go in the Scandinavian countries also. Now, we also know that the Vandals, when they moved out of Africa, went into Spain, and they set up a settlement called Galatia. And on the coat of arms in Galatia today is a cup, which represents the tribe of Asher. Asher's symbol was a cup because they were to pour oil. Now remember that Asher was also found in the area of the Scandinavian countries, and you notice the coat of arms for Denmark has a cup on it. Now you notice that in Denmark on the coat of arms you see a cup. Remember that many of the people of Asher were also found in the area of Scandinavia. Now, the coat of arms for Greater Sweden also has a cup on it. Now, let's go ahead and move on to Naphtali. Naphtali is probably one of my favorite of all the tribes. His mother, like we mentioned before, was Bilhah. He was closely associated with his brother Dan. And Bilhah was the handmaid, if you remember, of Rachel. So Dan would be his full brother. Naphtali means wrestling. And we want to go ahead and read his description here. Genesis 49, verse 21.
In Genesis 49:21, Naphtali is a deer that let loose. He uses beautiful words.
Okay, and yes, his symbol was a deer. And I think that's the most significant thing I've seen, because today in Sweden, on the coat of arms, they have a deer. Now, if you can go out to my website, you can take a look at that coat of arms for Sweden. It has a deer on it. And why would anybody put a deer on their coat of arms? What logical reason would they have for putting a deer on their coat of arms? It's unbelievable how these tribes actually match up with Scripture. And they were like a deer cut loose. This is in reference to probably sexual immorality, which has been a problem with some of the Scandinavian countries for a long time. But they have an unbelievable history. Naphtali has an unbelievable history, and most people do not know that Naphtali was the White Huns. There's much history about them. I'm going to mention and read you some of this information here about Naphtali, that he was the tribe that we call the White Huns. Now, his name in history was Hestalites, and the Greeks called him the Eptalites. So they just named it a little bit differently. Basically, in the beginning, around the Ural Mountain region, pushed himself into the area of Cushan, which is Pakistan today. And around the 5th century BC, he went into Persia. He defeated the Persian king. He pushed his way all the way into India. He controlled Pakistan and clear to India during the 5th century. Can you imagine that? These are the White Huns. I'm going to read you this quote from Pacophilus in his History of the Wars. He said, written in the middle 6th century, the Hestalites are of a stock of Huns, in fact, as well as in name. However, they do not mingle with the other Huns known to us. They are the only ones among the Huns that have white bodies. He was saying they're just as fierce as the other Huns. So they took over Pakistan. They would eventually lose those areas and push themselves back up into the area of the Scandinavian country. Now, among the Germanic tribes, they were called the Avars. That's Avars. You will see that name mentioned in history. That's who they were, the Avars. But they would eventually join in with the Vikings. So remember, the Vikings were a combination of many of the Scandinavian countries. So they would join in with the Vikings when the Vikings began their raids around the 7th and 8th century. So you notice how these tribes were just unbelievably strong and warlike. Now, I think it's amazing that Naphtali retains its exact Israelite name throughout history. He was called the Naphtalites, and the spelling is almost identically the same. He kept the same name throughout his history, the Naphtalites. Now, after Naphtali was defeated in Asia Minor, they tracked northward and they went to Norway, and Norway means the North Way. The first wave of White Huns and Danes settled in Norway and Denmark. The latter White Huns settled in Sweden. Now, it's really amazing to find out that the river that separates Norway and Russia is called the Gräs Jakob Elv, which means Jacob's Border River. And this is according to a historian named Swenson. Now, we ask ourselves, is there any historical proof that the Huns, the White Huns, moved into Norway? And there is. And there is a historical ancient book called the Hymkringel, written by Snorre. And he describes that the Norsemen tracked to the north beyond the Caspius mountain range, led by a priest named Odin, Odin. Now, that is a very famous name in history, and that Northman originally lived in Turkland or Asia Minor. I think that's really interesting. So there's our historical connection that the White Huns went into Norway. And the scripture said, and Bilhah and Rachel's maid conceived again and bare Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, with great wrestling have I wrestled with my sister and have prevailed and called his name Naphtali. So you will see this throughout history, that Rachel's children would wrestle with, especially Naphtali would wrestle with Leah's children. They do not want to be part of the EU. They especially want to be free because they were the children of handmaids who were slaves. Now, in summary, see the map below. You can see, based on the characteristics of the tribe and based on the symbol, this is where we believe the tribes went. And those tribes would eventually work their way into America and into Britain and into Australia and many other countries today.